We were thinking last week about being called to speak. We read how Jesus had been asked to preach in the synagogue in Nazareth. We thought about Paul's words about how love is the prerequisite for all true speaking. And we thought about the call of Jeremiah to be a prophet of God, protesting his reluctance, saying that he would not know what to say. Today, our Old Testament reading is another account of a call to prophesy. The person this week in the frame is Isaiah, one of the most revered prophets of the Jewish tradition. I've said it before, but I think it bears repeating that prophecy, properly understood, prophecy understood in the Old Testament sense, is not about predicting the future. I know that that's what the word has come to mean in the way that it's used in popular language. And so you get, for example, lobsters that prophesy the outcome of football matches, and some people will believe anything. But that kind of prediction of the future, and even the more serious kind that people claim to indulge in, is not the biblical idea of prophecy. Prophecy in the Bible is about speaking a word of God to people at a time when they need to hear it, and in a place, in a context in which they need to hear it. It's specific to particular people at particular times in particular places. And of course it does extend out from these specifics, and we read new things into them, into biblical prophecy that affects our lives too. There are times, of course, when prophecy would appear to be about the future, but it's not about prediction for its own sake. It's variously about hope for the future, or about warning, or about promises to be fulfilled. And often, as we saw last week, and as we shall hear again in a moment, the person tasked with delivering this word from God often felt unequal to the task, often was reluctant to be the messenger, often was overawed by the responsibility placed upon them. In the synagogue in Nazareth, what would have been the easy thing for Jesus to do? It would have been to say, I don't have a sermon ready. Ask someone else this week. What would have been the easy thing for Jeremiah to do? Just to insist that he really, really didn't know what to say. What would have been the easy thing for Isaiah to do? To hold to his initial conviction that he was not suitable, and to keep quiet. But none of them did the easy thing. All of them accepted the invitation, the commission to speak, to say what needed to be said. And at least in Jeremiah and Isaiah's case, they did it for many years. What would be the easy thing for us to do? Now, I suppose that question is slightly different. At least for me, the option not to speak isn't really there, not if I want to continue as a minister, and most of the time I do. The easy thing, though, for me to do would be to fill the speaking time with nice-sounding words, with thoughts about religious things, and avoid talking about things which relate to the world as it is. I rather think that quite a lot of the practice of religion is a form of escapism. But the trouble is, it's not supposed to be. We could spend our time looking inward. We could concentrate on thinking about ourselves. We could debate small arcane matters of doctrine, but what good would that do? It might make us feel a bit better. It might interest us in some way. But it probably wouldn't have any impact on the world beyond these walls and our minds. I wonder if you noticed the first words of our Old Testament reading, which Barbara read for us a few minutes ago. The first words, in the year that King Uzziah died. What's important about this? Well, immediately, this story of prophetic call is rooted in the context of real-world events, specifically a time of upheaval and transition. And that's the context into which Isaiah is called to speak words from God, into a real situation affecting real people's lives. And it's time we did the same. Because we are in a situation of upheaval and transition affecting real lives. It's time we spoke about Brexit. Now, this is not going to be political in the sense of thinking about being pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit. This is not about how anyone voted in the 2016 referendum. It's about the reality which we are learning and have been learning for the last number of months, we're all likely to be facing, no matter what anyone voted. And what I want to do is for us to begin to think about what, if anything, churches can do to respond. And I'm not meaning churches at some distant denominational level. I mean us, a congregation of ordinary, faithful people here in our community in Dalkeith. And I think we have to recognize that we are now living in a society, in a country which is perhaps more profoundly divided than it has been for a long time. And it's not just divisions over Brexit. It's divisions between those who are getting ever richer and the increasing number of people who we know of who are getting poorer and poorer, evidenced by the numbers, the increasing numbers who are having to use food banks. What we face after the 29th of March, I think, and many commentators who I've been reading think this too, what we face has the potential to make this situation worse. I say potential because nothing is certain at the moment, but many wise people are pointing in that direction. It seems likely that there will be some who will make considerable profits, because there are some who always do in times of upheaval and transition. But it seems likely that many people will suffer considerably as prices of the things that we need to buy are likely to rise, and as jobs are likely to be lost. And we've already seen Major manufacturers, Jaguar Land Rover and Nissan come to mind, scaling back on investment, citing the uncertainty of the political situation at the moment as part of their reason for deciding to do so. Although the United Kingdom produces 60% of the food it consumes, everything we import will be negatively affected by tariffs, by disruption at ports and by new customs requirements. Not just the things that we import from the EU, but everything we import, because all imports are currently governed by existing EU trade arrangements, which will cease to apply at 11 p.m. on the 29th of March. And if, as looks increasingly likely, the UK leaves without a deal, tariffs will be imposed on all imports. That's what WTO rules means. And that will push up prices. And there may be shortages of some food items, particularly imported things. And that will add to demand for domestically produced food. And when demand goes up, prices go up. There's a story in the Bible about a time of plenty in Egypt, followed by a time of famine. And in the story, as you know, Joseph organizes the stockpiling of food during the time of plenty, so that the people were able to ride out the famine. Stockpiling increasingly seems a good idea if you're able to do it. It may at least ease passage through a time of disruption. Is there a role for churches, a greater role, in fact, in working to keep people well fed? We already contribute generously as individuals and as a congregation to the storehouse. Can we rise to the challenge of there being more people unable to afford some of the food that they need? At this point, it might be worth reminding you that we have a fund in this congregation which was set up in the late 19th century to help people in poverty in the congregation and the town, and the fund is still there. So if you or someone you know finds yourself in real difficulty, speak to me or to one of our elders in confidence. We are seeing division in other parts of life too. There are, in the media, terrible and shameful stories about non-British nationals being abused. There's a rise in toxic nationalism, the idea that because a person was born elsewhere, they're somehow less valuable and have fewer rights and are less worthy of care and concern than people who are born here. Surely there is a role for all of us who believe that we are all made in the image of God to stand up to such dehumanizing practices and ideologies. We're also seeing an even greater decline in trust in politics. Now, I know politicians were maybe never the most trusted profession, but I think that the decline in trust is a serious matter because we have, as electors and elected, a contract, in a sense, to work together for the good of all. But as we watch those who are elected to serve in Parliament seemingly unable to find a good way through these difficult times, People are despairing of what politics is for. Now, I'm not saying that all of this is caused by or directly related to Brexit. Arguably, Brexit is in continuity with trends already visible in our society. But it is contributing, and it will continue to contribute to division, to a decline in trust, and probably to an increase in levels of poverty for a while. Who knows how long? Now, I don't have answers to this. None of us, I suspect, do. But I think it's important for us to begin a conversation and to participate as people of faith in the conversation which is already taking place. And I think our contribution as people of faith to this conversation must be around two things which the Church has held central to its life for as long as it's existed, namely the building up of community and care for one another. The Kirk Session has decided that in a couple of weeks' time we should hold a different kind of service. We're going to be in the hall. We'll sit round tables. We'll have coffee and croissants while we still can. And I won't be the only one who's doing the talking for a change. The idea for this, we're going to call it a cafe church service. The idea for it arose out of a conversation, a discussion that the Kirk Session had at its last meeting on what, as a congregation, we might make our goals for 2019. What this year might we hope to achieve? And we quickly saw that this was a conversation which needed to involve all of us, not just the elders. What can we do this year to be the best church we can be here in Dalkeith? Not just for ourselves, but for this community in the midst of which we live and worship. Maybe some of the things I've been saying today will feed into our conversation in a couple of weeks' time. Because make no mistake, we are in a time of crisis. It is a turning point. There is much that is unknown that is ahead of us. This crisis has all sorts of elements to it, Brexit being only one. And I think the blame, if we are to apportion blame, lies with everyone. Blame for the fragmenting of society, because we maybe have not been careful enough to build the bonds of community which are so necessary. Blame for the cheapening of political discourse, because we maybe have not been careful enough to stand up for what we fundamentally believe to be good and right. I don't think the blame lies with Leavers or with Remainers or with Tories or with Labour voters or with Nationalists or the supporters of any other party. People of all shades of political opinion bear responsibility, as do church people, not only for the state we're in, but we bear responsibility, each one of us, to work together to make things better. It is, I believe, our responsibility as people of faith, as people of goodwill, to name what is wrong in our society, fearlessly and without favour. That is prophetic ministry. And it's our responsibility to call our society to unity and to care for one another, not just by our words, but by what we actually do, living out the call to unity and care in our lives. And that is Christ-like ministry. Amen.